Hey XJW friends, did you know that a big court case was being held in the United Kingdom Supreme Court? Let's take a look. Back in 2021, the Barry Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses was held liable by the High Court in the United Kingdom, and they stated that the organization could be held liable for rape undertaken by one of its elders. I'm going to try to give you a brief rundown of the case. Mark Sewell is an elder. He's married. They are friends with this other couple. The wife of this couple, he assaults. Before this, leading up to it, he is very inappropriate with her and other women in the congregation, kissing them on the lips, making inappropriate gestures, saying inappropriate things. This friend does not want to hang out with Mark and his wife anymore. But unfortunately, she is continuously urged, because he is an elder, to rally around him, support him. He's going through something. He's having some issues. So even though she doesn't feel comfortable being around him, she's continuously pushed to be so. And unfortunately, one day they go out in field service, have some lunch and drinks afterwards. Things don't go very well. Everybody ends up back at their house, at Mark Sewell's house, the elder, and at the house is where he grapes the friend. When she tells everybody eventually, finally, because first she's forced to forgive him, and which she does, but eventually, because he's not sorry for his actions and hurts this child, a 14-year-old, I'm running out of time. She finally tells everybody what's happened, and they don't believe her because she doesn't have a witness to the event. And that's part of the rules as a Jehovah's Witness. You have to have a witness to an assault. So they don't believe her. They take this to court, and eventually, here we are, now court case. Vicarious liability means that an organization can be held responsible for the actions of its employees, agents, in this instance, an elder, because that organization is responsible for the actions of those it entrusts with authority. The test for vicarious liability is taken in 2 stages. Did this relationship give rise to risk because of the authority given to this man? And stage 2 is their connection linking the relationship and the act of the elder. The court ruled that there was vicarious liability for the Barry congregation. The Barry congregation appealed that decision, so that is the court case that was being heard in the High Court yesterday. So what do you think? Even though churches aren't supposed to be companies, do you believe that there is an inherent risk when you put somebody in a position of power that they may abuse it to the vulnerable? Let me know in the comments. That video was for my TikTok, but I want to go a bit deeper for my friends here on YouTube. I truly think that cases like these are going to set a precedent. Let's go into a little bit more of the details of the story, and also maybe we can talk a little bit more about what does inherent risk mean and vicarious liability. Trigger warning, we are now going to go into some of the gory details of the case. Mark Sewell is the elder. Mrs. B is the one who he assaulted. Mr. B is her husband. Mrs. B states that Mark began kissing women as they would enter into the congregation. This would leave Mrs. B feeling very uncomfortable, but not having anybody to complain to because it was done in the open in front of other people and nobody said anything about it. She didn't have an ability to complain. He was an elder in a position of authority. Mark Sewell, the elder, began behaving badly. His actions were volatile. He was drinking heavily, fighting with his wife, and he even began to flirt with Mrs. B, which made her very uncomfortable because he was making sexual innuendos, holding her hand, kissing her on the lips, compliments, etc. This prompted Mrs. B to talk to Mary, the wife of Mark, and they then talked to Mark's father, who encouraged them to rally around Mark. Tony Sewell said that his son was suffering from depression and he needed love and support. Mrs. B felt uncomfortable and reluctant, but still decided to rally around the elder because she felt it was her duty. Oh yeah, I don't want to forget, Tony Sewell, Mark's father, is also an elder. Mr. and Mrs. B felt as though they could not remove themselves from this situation. I am sure that had it not been for the fact that Mark was an elder and I had received an instruction from another elder, his father Tony, our friendship with Mark and Mary would have come to an end. This is where vicarious liability comes in, because had it not been for the instruction of the elders continuously forcing her into a position to be around somebody she did not feel comfortable being around, she never would have gotten to the point where she was assaulted. Yet and still, as far as I'm concerned, even if there hadn't been forewarnings of what was going to happen, I still believe that these people are put in positions of power and have access to vulnerable people. Anyway, back to the case. The two couples go out to Auxiliary Pioneer. Afterwards, they go out to a local pub for lunch. Mark has too much to drink, starts behaving badly, and this is when they eventually go back to Mark Sewell's house. And regardless of all Mark's behavior, Mrs. B's concern is still with, is he okay? Is he depressed? And she goes to tell him, you really should go talk to the elders about your depression. And that is where Mark takes advantage of her. Later on that day, Mrs. B told her husband what had happened. A few days later, Mrs. B confronts Mark, and he is so repentant that she feels she has no recourse but to forgive him. I felt a continued pressure to continue to support Mark due to his position and the complication as elder, as well as his father's earlier request. The position that both Mark and his father held within the congregation also made me feel I was unlikely to be believed if I chose to report Mark to the body of elders. That's quintessential. In May of 1990, Mr. and Mrs. B, Mark and Mary went together on a family holiday to Portugal. This holiday had been planned before the grape occurred. Mr. and Mrs. B didn't want to go on the trip, but they couldn't tell Mary that they didn't want to go on the trip because they never told her, because they had tried to forgive Mark for what he did because he cried and he was so repentant. They didn't want to be guilty of destroying their marriage, which of course they wouldn't have been, but cult thinking. Mrs. B states that she is feeling increasingly weary of Mark's behavior, but she feels helpless. On the holiday, Mark even ripped off Mrs. B's bikini top. Whoa. I believe this all came to a boiling point in 1991 when a 14-year-old came forward to Mrs. B and stated that Mark, the elder, had been sexually abusing her. When Mr. and Mrs. B confronted Mark, he said he could do what he liked because he was an elder and that he was not answerable to them. He said that the child needed to be disciplined because she had been smoking and that whatever she might have said would be lies. What the Mrs. B makes the decision to inform the elders about what Mark the elder has been doing. She also tells the child's father, who happens to be an elder too. That led to an investigation. Mrs. B described it as extremely painful and humiliating. She was subjected to inappropriate questions from the elders. Elder Mark denied the allegations, so they had no recourse because there was not a witness. Mrs. B was right. No one believed her. Just wait till you hear the Jehovah's Witness rebuttal. Are you ready for this? It's so lame. The organizational structure of Jehovah's Witnesses is modeled on first century Christianity as described in Scripture. In line with the precedent set in Acts 15, the governing body provides Bible-based instruction to over 8.5 million Jehovah's Witnesses in over 240 lands worldwide. There are around 90 branch offices worldwide, and the activity of each is overseen by a branch committee. The Britain Branch Committee has offices in London. During the period relevant to this claim, the branch was divided into districts, overseen by a district overseer. Each district comprised approximately 12 circuits. A circuit comprised approximately 20 congregations, and a circuit overseer, representing the branch office, visited each congregation for 6 days, twice yearly. Was that their attempt at saying, look at all of these people, there's no way that we can be responsible for them all? I look at all of that and say, sounds like an organized business to me. Anyway, on to their reply. There is no clergy-laity class distinction or paid clergy in our Christian community. The Bible teaches that there are no class distinction in the Christian congregation. We are not to show favoritism, and all are equal in God's sight. Oh boy, I'm choking on the words. Jehovah's Witnesses call and view each other as spiritual brothers and sisters. No human is a leader in the congregation. Whoa. Paid or not, these people are following your rules that you entrusted them with, right? No class distinction. There's no separation of sexes. Are you kidding me? And no, not everybody is treated equal. This is just blatant lies. We all know that the elite, the elders, have a very pervasive, intrusive control in our life. There is a hierarchy to their system, and the elders and the overseers, those above, have more power than regular Joe Schmo. Just like Mrs. B, when she told her experience, she was not believed. And the sad thing is she knew it. She knew she wasn't going to be believed. Elders and ministerial servants are put into positions of trust. And as you and I both know, we are never not a Jehovah's Witness. So you don't ever just take off your Jehovah's Witness hat and you go out to dinner and not be a Jehovah's Witness. At all times, if somebody were to give you direction and they are an elder, you would listen to them because you are always a representative of Jehovah. When you give people positions of authority and you say that it is divined by God, you give them control and access to vulnerable people, which leads to vicarious liability and things like inherent risk. The governing body should be held responsible for the rules that they hand down and the people that they entrust to uphold them. If the governing body wanted to protect people, they could. And the people at the bottom don't realize what's happening at the top and that people are not being held responsible when they themselves would be held responsible if they made a mistake or a sin, as they call it. There is no reciprocity. There is no equal inside of the Kingdom Hall. As soon as I hear an update to this appeal, I will let you know. I will leave links in the description if you want to check it out for yourself. My heart goes out to everybody standing up to the Watchtower and fighting back. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see y'all soon.